This episode of On the Beat is brought to you by Ingles. Shop online with Ingles Curbside Pickup. New curbside stores opening every week. Please welcome Mike Griffith.
Well, hey everybody, Mike Griffith here, and welcome to tonight's Ingles on the Beat show. Really appreciate Ingles helping us bring this program to you every week. Really cool, and a really special guest coming up. Chris Doering of the SEC Network is going to join us. He's going to talk about the location of the Georgia-Florida game in 26 and 27. CD is going to give you his hot take on that. Going to break down the additions of Texas and Oklahoma. Going to talk about Alabama's Kalen DeBoer, Alabama Light now, apparently. Celebrations in practice. Oh, my gosh. Nick Saban's turning over in his Jupiter Island beach house somewhere. And then Chris is going to talk about Georgia football, and he's going to shoot you straight. He's going to tell you what he really thinks about Kirby Smart. So you're going to want to check that out in segment 2. And, of course, in the end, we talk hot and cold. And there are some very hot things going on right now in Georgia and some not so hot things going on in college football. I'm going to call somebody out. I'm going to call out a giant today. And you're not going to argue with me. I promise you. You're going to agree with what I say when I call out this giant in college football. So, beginning of the show, welcome to it. I want to talk about Carson Beck. How could I not? Beck was down there at the Manning Pass Academy. A new look Carson Beck. Jeff Santel pointed this out. His hair is highlighted. I guess they're called frosted tips or something like that. Well, Carson Beck looking pretty GQ in front of the camera and sounding like the assertive quarterback that Kirby Smart has been trying to get. Listening to Beck talk and handle these interviews, I was so impressed. I wondered if Carson had it in him. He's such a laid-back and cool guy, doesn't like to be too definitive, doesn't like to overstate things. Well, listen, you will not mistake anything Carson Beck has had to say. If you've been reading these articles that I've been pumping out on DawgNation.com, I was so inspired by Carson Beck's 8-minute interview, I did a 4-part series on it. And the beginning was Carson Beck saying, "We're the hunters." You know, because the question was asked. It was an innocent enough question from one of the locals down there about Georgia. Well, now you're number one again. You're the hunted. And Carson stepped up and said, like Kirby says, we are always hunting. It never stops. It never changes. I really like that attitude from Carson. He gets it now. I think he understands he's got to be aggressive. Now, he is a Heisman Trophy co-favorite, and he is the projected number 1 pick. And I think he's the most talented quarterback that Georgia's had since Matthew Stafford. I don't doubt that at all. In fact, I think if Carson had gone pro, I think there's a good chance he would have won the Denver Broncos starting quarterback job. You see Bo Nix out there right now. I think teams would have taken Carson Beck ahead of Bo Nix. I believe the Broncos had the number 12 pick. So, Georgia fans, you may not like the Lamborghini. You may not like the Instagram account with the expensive dinners and the watches and the private transportation, but you've got yourself an NFL quarterback in Carson Beck, and he sounds loaded for bear. Couldn't say enough about the way Carson handled it. Just sounded. The swagger was back. This is the guy that came in talking smack about his basketball game in that freshman interview with DJ Shockley, telling all those other 5-star recruits that he could take any of them and hoop. Carson's back. He's got his feet underneath him. He understands the offense. Year 2 in Mike Bobo. In fact, Carson said, I love pressure. He wants the pressure. I mean, it's a lot to say, bring it on in front of the camera. You know, the mic is live, Carson. People are going to remind you of this. It wasn't so long ago you were one-on-one with a chance to win the SEC championship game, and he didn't get it done. And now Carson's saying he's going to get it done. You saw him get it done against Florida State in the first half, 35 points in the second quarter. You saw Carson get it done against Ole Miss when everything was clicking and he had his full complement of healthy receivers. He has got a supporting cast this year. He's got an incredible offensive line in front of him. His backfield is loaded. You got 2 power backs ready to go. Rod Robinson, this guy's not being talked about enough. Trust me. I know it didn't look like much in G-Day, but there were 3 guys hitting Rod Robinson in the backfield, and he was still falling forward for 2 and 3 yards. This guy is going to be hell to bring down because guess what? When Georgia plays other teams not named Georgia, he ain't going to get hit until a linebacker gets a piece of him or some poor safety comes up and tries to take on that 240-pound monster. Looking forward to Rod Robinson moving the chains and pushing the pile. And Branson Robinson, we've talked about Branson, had the patellar tendon injury. It looked pretty bad, and some people wondered when or if he'd be. I'm hearing Branson Robinson is getting real close. So I think you've got 2 legit power backs, Rod at 240, Branson at 220, and then you got the toys. I call this the toy section. Trevor Etienne, he can kill you. He can beat you so many different ways. Yeah, he can go up the middle, but he can get the corner on you. He can come out of the backfield and run a wheel route, catch the ball downfield. He can take a screen. His quickness, I do believe, and this is quite a statement, but I think he's a smidgen quicker than DeAndre Swift. I don't know that he's got Swift's power, but I don't know that he doesn't, because I saw him run between the tackles in G-Day as well. I mean, little guys like that aren't supposed to have the balance and the power to get through some of those linebackers and D linemen that were putting a pad on ETN, but he looked fantastic. And I think Nate Frazier comes in, the 5-star back from Mater Dei High School, JT Daniels High School, the #1 perennial national championship high school. Nate Frazier ran a 10-500, folks, and he's got speed, and he's got moves, and he's got hunger. So I think this is going to be the deepest backfield that you've seen since the Gurley, Sony Michel, DeAndre Swift 2017 team. I mean, I am really looking forward to this Georgia run game. I love it when teams pound it out, because what that does is it brings those safeties up. And now it's time for Carson to play action downfield. Now, we wonder a little bit about the receivers. Dom Lovett last year, I don't want to say he disappointed, but he wasn't the burst of juice that I expected right out of the gate. To be fair, McConkey handled that, and Brock Bowers was still a go-to guy. But you saw Lovett come up with, 10 catches in that G-Day game, including the game-time catch late, one of the most miraculous catches I've seen of late. I'm expecting a big breakout year from Dom Lovett. Colby Young, the transfer from Miami, I know he's been working with Carson this offseason. Talk about a red zone target, a 6'4" guy that can go up above the rim. He's going to be hard to stop. And the tight ends room, it's not bare. Oscar Delp is Charlie Warner in waiting. This is a professional tight end that can block and catch the ball. And the Urasek kid from Stanford, they tell me he's got some juice. I'm waiting to see if he can, emulate Brock Bowers on the speed sweeps or, get the yards after the catch. But this is a talented guy. And Lawson Lucky was a guy that was lighting it up last spring. And then he had the ankle injury in the fall. So you never really got to see the Lawson Lucky that everybody was talking about. Everybody's been rating him. Even Kirby Smart mentioned the freshman. When Kirby talks about a freshman, it's something. Jaden Riddell, the freshman tight end, 6'4", 235. I think he's another one of these move guys. So what does all this mean when we start talking about all these different pieces and parts and weapons? It means Georgia is going to be incredibly difficult to defend this year. They're going to keep going with this double tight end. The inline tight end and then the split out tight end creates matchup nightmares. Now, how do they decide what to do? Every game, Mike Bobo and that offensive staff sits back and looks at the defense and says, where can we exploit these guys? Where are they weak? Where do we like the matchup? And they can dictate that, whether they go 2 tight ends, 1 running back and 2 receivers, or 2 tight ends, 2 running backs and 1 receiver, big, jumbo, or whether they go with what you call 11 personnel, 1 running back, 1 tight end, 3 receivers. Georgia's got it covered. And the fact that it's year 2, I think it means a lot. I think about this. The 22 Georgia football team, I don't think they were quite as good as 2021, although they went undefeated and 2021 team lost 1 game. I still think the 2021 team was probably better. But what the 22 team had was cohesion. And that was because Todd Monken had a second year with Stetson Bennett. And suddenly you saw an offense that was designed around Stetson Bennett's talents. And that was a lot of high percentage throws, low, short throws. Stetson also threw a beautiful deep ball when it was there. When he had isolated matchups, he could recognize that. And Stetson was able to roll and create plays. And so an offense was built around his skills. Now, I think Mike Bobo had a pretty good idea what Carson could do because he had worked hand in hand with Todd Monken the year before as an analyst. But now Bobo, I think, is locked in. And more importantly, I think Carson's locked in to Mike Bobo. I think Carson was competing for the job last year. Now Carson knows it's his job. These are his guys. And I think that continuity from year 1 to year 2, just like it clicked in for Stetson and Monken in 2022 when that team went undefeated, even though they lost more talent than any college program had ever lost in history. I'm going to repeat that because nobody else talks about this. Georgia lost more talent off of 2021 than any program in college football history. You need me to prove it? Go back and look. 15 players were drafted into the NFL. All right. And that doesn't include a linebacker that would have been a first-round pick as well. 15 players on NFL record gone to the NFL, plus the transfer portal. 13 players off of the two deep, including 4 former starters. That would wipe out any other program. Most any other program would not be able to reload, much less reload and have a perfect season like Georgia did, right? The key was that continuity. The key was that it was year 2 of Monken and Stetson Bennett. The key was understanding what your personnel could do. I think this Georgia team is as locked in as any that I've seen. And I think there's a good chance that we could say that this will be the most prolific offense in Georgia football history. And I expect that front seven to step up. I do. I don't think Nazir Stackhouse came back, to eat more meals at Bones inside the indoor facility. Nazir could be in the NFL right now competing for a starting job as a late second or third round pick. He's back. Same goes for Warren Brinson. And the depth there is just awesome. I want to see this Xavier McLeod kid from South Carolina. You see him in pads. Let me tell you, this guy is athletic. I don't care what happened to Carolina. He's on his second chance at Georgia, and it looks to me like he's making the most of it. Big Baby was out there. We saw Jordan Big Baby Hall doing Camp Sunshine, doing some good work. He looked good, looked like he's going to be ready to go. Christian Miller, another guy that I think Georgia is ready to plug and play. They can make big plays. And those linebackers, they were freshmen. They made some mistakes. Alabama scored their first touchdown in the SEC title game on a bust on a 1st and 20. That doesn't happen to Georgia. It won't happen this year. Georgia's linebackers are going to be ready to go, anxious and eager to see if Smile Munnen's ready to get back. I think one of the most underrated players in college football. Now, you might tell me there's some questions about the secondary because you lost 3 guys that were drafted in the top 100. And that's true. There were some special guys that moved on. But I think Malachi Starks is a great leader. And I think that defensive backs room is going to be working really hard. There's a lot of competition for positions, and that is good news, right? Guys want to play. There's probably 8, 9 guys that could start at any SEC school that right now are competing for 5 spots in the Georgia secondary when they line up in that 3-3-5 defense, which we see a lot against multiple receiver sets, which you will see against Alabama, which you will see against Texas in 2 of the biggest games of the year. I'm going to bring Chris Doering on in just a second. Chris is going to talk about those games. He's going to talk about those matchups, and he's going to tell you what he thinks the winning edge is for Georgia and Kirby Smart. My winning edge when I go to the supermarket, you already know. It's Ingles. It'll be your winning edge too. Let's listen to this message from our sponsor, Ingles.
It's good! He could go all the way! Yeah!
At Ingles, we're proud to partner with area athletics, from Little League to the pros, college tournaments to high school heroes. It's all in the bag.
You ready? Hold on, let me check the score.
Ingles, low prices, love the savings.
Well, welcome back to the show. And as promised, we've got the SEC Network's Chris Doering joining us. And of course, a lot of people remember Chris held that touchdown receptions record for several years in the SEC before, what was it, Devontae Smith, Chris, that broke that record?
Yeah, it was Devontae that broke it. It was 25 years, which I felt like was probably much longer than I deserved. So very grateful to have had it for as long as I did.
And then Chris played a little bit in the NFL, now a television star working with Peter Burns and on the SEC Network. Of course, you see him on those game day weekends. So much fun to watch Chris in studio. Chris, before I get into the wrap here, what are those Saturdays like for you when you're sitting in studio and we're seeing you break down the games? What's happening during the course of the day? When does your day start and what's going on in that studio?
Yeah, well, typically I'm heading into my 10th season with the network, and I've done the Friday, Saturday shows the entirety of my career. So Friday's a little of the preview of the weekend, and Saturday, just like any other fan, man, we start watching at noon. We're in the studio sitting there watching games and get a chance to do the halftime of that noon game, and then the Phil show between games as part of our triple header. So we have a couple different halftime and Phil shows, and then at the end of the night we do the 1-hour wrap show that kind of all the SEC fans tune into to get a recap of the long form highlights and the breakdowns that we do. So it's a fun day. It's a long day, but we're doing like every other SEC fan, and that's watching football in this league and talking about it, except we're getting paid for it. So it's a dream come true, man. I really enjoy what I get to do and the people I get to do it with.
No doubt. Taking notes the whole time. I'm sure Chris also, heads up the Steve Spurrier Coaching Award. It was kind of interesting a few years ago, Chris, when I came to you with this idea. I knew you played for Coach Spurrier, but I didn't realize the relationship you had. You want to give me a word about that award, what that's meant to you in Gainesville?
Yeah, no, it's been great for our community. It's been great for me to be involved in it. It's a way to honor my coach, a guy that I say every year has done more for my life more than anybody outside of my parents, and the things that I've learned playing football from him have transferred over to my life after football. The parenting that I use, a lot of it has to do with stuff that I learned from him. So very grateful, as you said, playing in Coach Spurrier's heyday of those Florida teams in the mid-'90s. As a Florida fan growing up, it was a dream come true to kind of be a part of that ascension of the program and to honor Coach for all that he's done for not only Florida, but South Carolina. The winningest coach at the two SEC institutions is pretty crazy and speaks to just what a great coach he was. And, that first-year Coach of the Year award, something I know he's proud of, given the success he had immediately when he took over at Duke, immediately when he took over at Florida, and immediately when he actually won the first-year Coach of the Year award in South Carolina. So it's been fun. It's been a great community aspect, and it's been really nice to reunite a bunch of his former players as we've come together to honor him every February.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun for sure, and they put on a great show. Chris, the Florida-Georgia game, Georgia-Florida game, depending on what side you're on, a lot of discussion about where that's going to be now that the Jacksonville Jaguars have gotten their stadium plans approved, and we know the next 2 years it's going to be in Jacksonville, but there's some talk about 2026 and 2027. This is one thing you and Coach Spurrier don't agree on, interestingly enough. Coach Spurrier wants it to remain at neutral sites. We know that it very likely will, because the financial aspect and the amount of money that these schools can make in an age where they're trying to find ways to get more NIL money, pay coaches, etc. But you're a proponent for this game to be home and home. 80% of the fans.
Oh, I am not. I am big time remaining in Jacksonville, man. I am a purist when it comes to tradition.
When the stadium is under construction.
During that 2 years, I got you. Yeah.
So tell me why you would like to see it go home and home during those 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think I speak from a perspective of having, played in the series when it was home and home. There's not a whole lot of Florida or Georgia players that have played one another in Jacksonville, in Gainesville, and in Athens, and I had a chance to experience that. I wanted to remain in Jacksonville for the entirety of the rivalry, but given what's going to happen in those 2 years, I do think it's kind of a cool change-up, not only for the players to get a chance to go play in those iconic stadiums that they don't get a chance to visit, but for the fans. I know that there are a lot of Gator fans that enjoyed going to Athens in '95 when we went up there, and vice versa for Georgia fans to get a chance to come to the Swamp. It feels a little different. It doesn't feel like the normal Florida game when you have it home and home, but I think it beats going to Orlando and Atlanta. I think that'll feel kind of goofy, and might as well give those players and coaches the opportunity to experience if you do have to be displaced for 2 years.
So some strong words from Chris Doering on that. I think that might catch a few Georgia fans off guard a little bit to hear Gator saying he wants the home and home those 2 years only, because once that Jacksonville Stadium's built, $1.3 billion, it's going to be one of the most remarkable stadiums in the world, and there's going to be a lot of opportunities for a lot more money to be made, and you will have a facility that is on par with what this rivalry is all about. Well, the news today, and you know this better than anyone, this is the first day that Texas and Oklahoma become official. So what does it mean to you? You've sat there with me on the sideline, watched all this unfold. Now that it's finally here, what's your anticipation? What does it mean for the league?
Well, I tell you what, it was a long buildup, right? We waited almost 3 years once that news kind of slipped out when we were at Media Days back in 2021, and it created quite a stir then. I've had a couple instances where I've gotten to preview it the last 2 years at SEC spring meetings, where 2 years ago there was a contingent from Texas and Oklahoma in attendance, and then this past year having the coaches from each of those schools be there as well kind of just continued to build the anticipation. But now it's here, and watching the celebration last night in Austin, the anticipation for watching what's going to happen in Norman later tonight, these fans are more excited than I would have even expected. And I think it's a match made in heaven, given the tradition and success of those two programs, the passion for which the fan bases have for their football programs and athletic departments in general, the commitment to athletics that they have financially. So I think it only makes sense. And we just talked about fans getting a chance to go play in stadiums or watch their teams play in stadiums that they haven't ever been to before. I know Georgia fans are excited. It's a tough ticket, even tougher hotel room to get that weekend in Austin. Florida fans get a chance to make that trip as well. Alabama goes to Oklahoma. So there's some interest already in hitting the road and getting to see those stadiums and see the tradition of those programs and what campus is like on a game day there in the fall.
little bit of SEC arrogance from me here, Chris. I think life's going to be different maybe than what these expectations are for the programs. I mean, I think Texas played 5 games decided by 10 points or less last year, and a few of them overtime against Kansas State, a 10-point win at Iowa State. You play like that in the SEC, you're not coming away with the win. Let me start with Oklahoma. Obviously a very rich tradition. Coach Venables now, I believe, going into his 3rd year. Expectations for Oklahoma this season.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. First and foremost, no bigger SEC homer than I am, but I can tell you from my experience, the week in and week out grind, not only the physical grind of playing in the conference, but the mental grind, the fatigue that sets in after you play SEC opponent after SEC opponent. If you lose a game, turning the page and not letting one loss turn into 2. So I'm with you. I think both of these programs are going to, learn quickly what it's like to play in the grind of the SEC. I think Oklahoma's probably a little behind what I expect Texas to be. Texas proved, at least for one Saturday, that they had what they needed to compete in this league, and that was physicality on the offensive and defensive line. Credit to Brent Venables, though. In his first year, they were terrible up front on the lines of scrimmage. He hit the transfer portal hard. They upgraded both lines of scrimmage, and I think they're much more SEC ready than they were maybe 2 years ago. But I think both of those programs are going to have a learning curve as it relates to acclimating to the SEC and the grind of playing in the schedule every week.
Yeah, no doubt. Before we bury Oklahoma too much, let's remember they beat Texas last year in that rivalry game. Now, Texas, as you said, a 10-point winner over Alabama. I think that had more to do with a poor coaching job by Nick Saban's staff, not having Jalen Milroe ready to play and understanding what he could do. Lost by 10 points at home to Texas in Tuscaloosa. Ultimately was a death blow to Georgia via transitive property.
They did get beat on the lines of scrimmage, though, and that's something that you're not used to seeing is Alabama offensive linemen getting dominated up front, pushed back into the face of the quarterback over and over again. The inability to run the ball against Texas, it was pretty impressive to think about what Texas at least had done in 1 week in terms of being stout on the points of attack.
Yeah, and they've reloaded that defensive line. They got a guy by the name of Bill Norton, actually started his career at Georgia, now coming back to the SEC after a stop at Arizona. A couple Arizona defensive linemen and a pretty talented guy from Louisville as well. So Texas has gone portal to load that back up on the defensive front. That will be a question. Quinn Ewers is the co-Heisman Trophy favorite with Carson Beck, Chris. What have you seen from Ewers? And if you break him down against Beck, how does it look?
Yeah, I was shocked at how well he played last year against Alabama in week 2. Hadn't had that much success throwing the ball, 15, 20 yards down the field, but was lights out in that ball game. I want to see him be more consistent. And when I say consistent, I want to see him throw the ball like that week in and week out. But I also want to see him be available week in and week out. This is a guy that's been injured in each of the last 2 years, has missed some time in both of those seasons. So if you're going to win the Heisman and, more importantly, compete for a college football playoff spot, you have to have your quarterback. You have to have some luck as it relates to injuries and staying healthy. But you definitely need to have Quinn Ewers in the lineup. And you can say whatever you want about Arch Manning. It's not going to be good if he has to come in and play significant time at first year in the SEC. So you need Quinn Ewers to be healthy. And I have Carson Beck slightly ahead of Quinn Ewers in my Heisman preseason voting, but I think he should be there in the end, largely because of what Steve Sarkisian does. I think dating back to his time at Alabama, was really impressed with what he did with Mac Jones. And you mentioned Devontae Smith earlier. Devontae and the rest of those receivers for Alabama's offense benefited greatly from what Steve Sarkisian does in terms of creating mismatches and teaching the passing game. It really reminds me a lot of my time at Florida and what they do pushing the ball down the field and creating some binds that they put the secondary in with what they do in field distribution.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Florida used to have receivers running at all 3 levels, sideline to sideline, really spread the defenses out, and a really sneaky good run game the Gators had. I would say the same for Texas. I wonder a little bit about replacing a guy like A.D. Mitchell as well as Xavier Worthy. And as a receiver, quarterbacks are only as good as their targets. I suppose they got Isaiah Boyd from Alabama through the portal. Not really sure what other weapons he has to work with, but I'm guessing probably a pretty decent arsenal for Sark.
Yeah, crazy to think about Isaiah Bond making that catch last year against Auburn to win the game, and now maybe one of the biggest plays that we've seen in Alabama history, now playing for Texas. But, the transfer portal giveth, the transfer portal taketh, and so I guess that's part of the game these days is you got to be able to adjust, and certainly as fans, we got to be able to adjust to see guys in different uniforms from year to year.
I know Georgia, Texas has been circled by a lot of people as the game that people think could have the most impact on the college football playoff. And that remains to be seen, that October 19th date. One thing, when I was looking at the Texas schedule, the week right after they play Oklahoma, going to be tough for Texas to get up for 2 games in a row like that. Other than Georgia, Texas, Chris, what other games are you keyed in on in the SEC this season?
First and foremost, I love the idea of new rivalries kind of springing up from nowhere. I talked about my experience on my show this morning. Back in '92, when we added Arkansas and South Carolina, it wasn't rivalries for us, at least with Arkansas or South Carolina, that became the biggest deal. It was teams that you didn't play a lot. And for us, it was Tennessee. Tennessee became an instant rival with us. So I'm interested, who becomes the biggest rival of Texas or Oklahoma that's an existing SEC member, and what other SEC rivals kind of becomes a little more familiar with one another with now the elimination of the East and the West, teams getting to play one another more often. Familiarity breeds contempt. And so I do think it's going to be fun to watch some of the new rivalries that kind of develop with a little bit more familiarity with all the 16 teams playing one another. But obviously, I'm looking forward to Georgia, Alabama next year. Florida. I wish Florida was better because Florida makes a trip to Austin as well. I think there's a lot of Gator fans that are excited about getting a chance to go visit that place. Alabama travels to Norman, Oklahoma, in the second to last weekend of the year. And it's kind of fun to see Alabama and LSU playing one another in the final game of the season. LSU, Texas A&M kind of became something we expected to end the season with. Now Texas and Texas A&M will play one another in that spot. And Alabama and LSU moving into kind of the rivalry weekend spot is kind of interesting as well there.
Yeah, there's going to be some changes in Tuscaloosa that go beyond the schedule. Kalen DeBoer brings a different mindset to Alabama. Now, still using Nick Saban, still having his defensive coaches meet with Coach Saban, as Coach Saban has maintained an office in Tuscaloosa in addition to that $17 million home in Jupiter Island. The other day, Jalen Milroe was talking about practice, Chris. And I don't know what Coach Spurrier's practices were like, but I know what Kirby's are like, and I suppose they're probably a lot like Nick's in terms of the level of focus and intensity play in and play out. And as Milroe told the story about completing a pass downfield and looking to the sideline for the next play, DeBoer comes out to him and says, "Hey, man, what are you doing?" And he said, "I'm looking for the play, Coach." He said, "You need to be celebrating. That was a great play. I thought you'd run down the field." Now, you and I know that's the last thing in the world Nick Saban would tell a guy during practice. So I guess I would ask you, what about that mindset when you get a mindset shift like that? You played for enough coaches in the NFL. I'm guessing there was varying styles as well. How do you think that's going to go over in Tuscaloosa? Pros and cons to that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked that question, Mike, because I had Coach Spurrier for the entirety of my college career, but I did go from Florida in '95 to being drafted by Jacksonville, where Tom Coughlin was the head coach. And the contrast between what practice and life was like with Coach Spurrier to what it was like with Coach Coughlin was very, very different. It definitely had a little bit of an adjustment phase for me. And I think one of the things that's interesting too is you go from a defensive-minded head coach to an offensive-minded head coach, and that's a very different kind of feel too. Having played for Coach Spurrier, knowing that he viewed practice being a success or failure based upon how the offense did, and specifically the passing game. So I'm sure there's a little aspect of that as it relates to Kalen DeBoer and wanting his guys to have fun when they have success throwing the football around. But I think for Jalen Milroe, it's especially important because I do think there's so much pressure playing the quarterback position for Alabama. And I think sometimes you can get caught up in taking things a little too serious and let the pressure get to you. Jalen Milroe's at his best when he's having fun. Remember those post-game interviews from last year when he was celebrating, when he's talking to the media with that big smile, he's playing at his best. And I think that is what Kalen DeBoer is trying to capture with the offense in general, and specifically with Milroe, and trying to get him to play a little more loose, because the guy's an amazing athletic specimen for sure.
He certainly has the clutch gene. Saw that against Georgia, and of course we saw that with the Milroe miracle against Auburn. These are some obvious storylines that you and I are spitting out: Texas, Oklahoma, Milroe, DeBoer, Sark, Georgia on top. What are some storylines maybe a little under the radar that you could expect to emerge this season?
Yeah, I think last year kind of the surprise of the league was, the two teams coming out of nowhere winning 11 games. That was Missouri and Ole Miss. And if you look at a lot of the projections from this year, Ole Miss is one of the teams that people are talking about as being a likely participant in the 12-team playoff. But we're not hearing anything about Missouri, and I don't really understand that. Cody Schrader's gone, but there's a lot of talent back on that team, including Brady Cook. You got some explosiveness and maybe one of the best receiving cores in the league with what Missouri returns there. Blake Baker is a big loss for Missouri's defense as he goes from Columbia to Baton Rouge as the defensive coordinator for Brian Kelly and LSU. But I think those two teams are ones I want to see. Can you maintain the success? Are you going to be a one-hit wonder? Are you going to be able to sustain what you did last year? And who's going to be the dark horse team that comes out of nowhere this year? I kind of like Tennessee to return to double-digit wins after taking a step back from what they did in 2022 last year. Nico Iamaleava was tremendous during the spring. I got a chance to watch their first scrimmage. They, too, have a really deep and talented group of wide receivers. I think the defense will be better as well. And they have one of the more manageable schedules in the league, which I think is important. It's all kind of splitting hairs when you talk about, playing within this conference. But, I think Florida and Georgia, nobody did them any favors when it relates to the difficulty of the schedule. But I do think Tennessee is one of the beneficiaries of the new scheduling model.
Before we talk about Georgia, I just want to point out that Chris is keeping up with Peter Burns on the pronunciation of the Tennessee quarterback's name. Not just a pretty face and a former football player. That is a very professional pronunciation. Can you say his name again, Chris?
Yes, Nico Iamaleava. How about that? It took us a while to get Tua Tagovailoa, but once you got it down, it rolled off the tongue. And I feel like I'm at that point with Nico now after getting a chance to see him during the spring. And even I thought the bowl game was a huge benefit from him, getting a chance to get ready during the bowl prep as the starter, and then played really well in that Tennessee offense in that one.
Yeah, Chris Doering already in mid-season form with the new.
I don't know about that. I do realize I butchered the schedule as I'm thinking about it. There's no way Auburn or no way Alabama's playing LSU in the final game of the season. That's an Auburn Alabama weekend. So I was thinking about Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma and LSU play in the final week of the season, which will kind of be interesting there. But I am trying to knock the rust off a little bit, but I appreciate your acknowledgement of the pronunciation for sure.
I'm impressed. I'm going to need some practice with that one, no doubt about it. Now let's talk about Georgia. You were the guy that tipped me off. I don't mind sharing the source now. At the SEC championship game, Doering pulled me aside and said, "Hey, man, this Trevor Etienne thing is pretty real. This is not just a rumor. The word on the Gainesville campus is." And then I heard from some other Florida media members that, when Billy Napier met and said, "Look, we lost a lot of guys, but really the guy we really didn't want to lose was Etienne." And I saw the magic in the G-Day game. I mean, this guy looks like Marshall Faulk to me, Chris. You've got a lot more knowledge of Etienne. What do you think the Dogs are going to get with him?
Yeah, you get a guy that is looking for more carries, and in the day and age of the running back position that a lot of guys are wanting to save some tread on the tire. He actually left Florida because he was upset in not getting more the bulk of the run game. Splitting time last year with Montrell Johnson. Johnson and Etienne were set to return this year. He didn't see an opportunity for him to be the bell cow back, so I think he was looking for more. And certainly there's a supposed nice NIL package that Georgia was able to offer him as well. So, I think you get a guy that can catch the ball out of the backfield in addition to running the ball. He had some issues last year, most notably the going out of bounds against Missouri in the late game situation. But those are growing pains that I think benefit you in terms of your development. So Georgia gets to work with a guy that's been really successful the last 2 years in the SEC, who has probably eliminated some of those younger player mistakes, and they get a guy that's primed to take over and wants to be the next bell cow back at Georgia, which we know is quite an honor given all the history of running backs that school's put out.
No doubt. Chris says this through gritted teeth, loves his Gators. Other than Etienne and other than Beck, I'm guessing Georgia is your pick as well. So I'd like you to speak a little bit more about some of the things you like about Georgia. And then two, with that schedule, Chris, is there a way the Dogs can go undefeated in the regular season again? Three undefeated regular seasons in a row.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about what Coach Smart's been able to do in terms of staying unblemished during the regular season, with everybody, kind of shooting for the Dogs and being back-to-back national champions heading into last season. And maybe the best thing that Georgia fans are most excited about is Nick Saban no longer the head coach at Alabama. So I do think that one of the things that I've really remarked about Coach Smart and what he's been able to do is the number of players that he is able to recruit and retain and understand their roles in terms of what they are going to have the opportunity to do. If you stay at Georgia, you're going to develop, which they do really well, particularly on the defensive side. You're going to have a chance to play for national championships, which they certainly have played a lot in the last few years. And then finally, you're going to have a chance to make a lot of money. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, with putting up the most outstanding stats. It's about being an unselfish player, particularly, knowing your role on defense, waiting for your time, being patient, and then taking advantage of it. So I really respect the hell out of that. And I respect the hell out of what we've seen on the offensive side the last couple of years. And I know a lot of people last year were not happy with Mike Bobo early in the season. I thought he played it really well, right? You had a first-year starter in Carson Beck. You didn't need to show a whole lot. You could play vanilla. You could play somewhat conservative. You could let your young quarterback develop. And then when they finally took the reins off of him, he was ready to go and played really well. So I thought that Mike Bobo deserved a lot better than Georgia fans had treated him the last year or plus. And I'm really excited to see, what that offense looks like now with those two guys coming back after working together last year and having an off season together. It's, I have a soft spot in my heart for coaches that return to their alma maters and what it's like to play for a guy like that. Not only did I play for Coach Spurrier, but I played for Dwayne Dixon, who was a former receiver at Florida. He was our receiver coach. And it really is special to hear those guys talk about their experience, to coach from a perspective of being invested for more than just a contract. And, I hope Georgia fans appreciate what Mike Bobo has been able to do with that offense since taking over 2 years ago.
No doubt, I would agree. I think Will Muschamp had a lot to do with Georgia's national championships coming back to Georgia, and I think Mike Bobo and Kirby with that trust. I don't think people understand that, when the head coach is a defensive coach and he's given that offensive coach a lot of free rein and a lot of rope, there's got to be a lot of trust there, no doubt about it. I think Georgia loaded for bear this season, Chris. Now, we see you on the SEC Network all the time. You mentioned you do a show. Where else can people find you outside of your SEC Network appearances?
Yeah, man, we got lots going on in addition to the Friday and Saturday shows. We do year-round a show on the SEC channel on Sirius XM. That's channel 374. It's me, PB, Alyssa Lang, Dari Noka, Caroline Fenton. Lots of different names and faces get a chance to talk SEC sports in general year-round. So that's fun. We do our simulcast during the football season on the SEC Network on Friday and Monday mornings as well. And then, you can see some occasional travel stuff on my Instagram, Doering28, which looking to have some fun here, man. Only 8 weekends left before we crank the season up. So trying to take every advantage of the remaining summer travel schedule that I can.
Well, I can vouch for that. CD and fun are synonymous. So check out I would go to the Instagram first, because you just don't know what you may see there. Maybe you won't be able to unsee it either, but you will enjoy Chris's post. Chris, always enjoyed talking your knowledge, your enthusiasm for the game, and your love for the sport. It really makes a difference for the fans.
Well, I tell you what, Mike, what you do to your passion for this conference as a whole. I know you're covering the Georgia beat now, but you're an encyclopedia of knowledge about the SEC dating back to your days at Alabama and through Tennessee. And I love talking about the former players and the former games with people that have been around as long as you have. I guess that's a backhanded compliment because it means you're old as well, but it's a lot of fun to compare notes on our passion for the league.
Hey, well, you're older than you look too, buddy. Hey, I'll hit you up later. I appreciate it, Chris.
All right, man. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thank you. Chris Doering. Now it's time for our hot and cold segment, brought to you by Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing.
Want to make sure your family stays comfortable all year long? Our family of trained comfort specialists are available anytime to service or repair your system. Or it may be time to replace your old units with a new trained HVAC system.
We are a locally owned family business, and we carefully select the technicians who we send into your home.
At Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing, we are large enough to handle all of your HVAC and plumbing needs,
but small enough to care.
Call today to take advantage of our 3-visit annual maintenance plan.
Welcome back to the program. Chris Doering, always a lot of fun. I mean, the thing I like about Chris, cool as a cucumber, Peter Burns gives him heck, and Chris never stops smiling, and he does love the game. Yes, he loves the Florida Gators. He's going to tell you that up front, but he shoots straights about all the schools. He's got a great relationship with everybody. Really encourage you to follow Chris. Just think he does a phenomenal job. Now, hot and cold. How can I start with anything but the weather? I mean, listen, everybody complains, but this is really ridiculous. I mean, the heat index over 100 degrees. Well, what does that mean to me? It means I stay inside a little bit more, but it also means that Kirby's guys are going to be tight because Kirby likes the heat training. Now, George is very safe about this. We see that at practices, plenty of water breaks. The guys understand how to train in this heat. But this is an asset for Georgia, and these Georgia Bulldogs are working very hard right now. Make no mistake about it. Now, Carson's already had some of the receivers down to Jacksonville this offseason, but when these guys are sweating outside Butts-Mehre Heritage Hall and doing that running in the morning when it's already 80, 85 degrees with 85% humidity, it does help Georgia out a little bit. The addition of Texas and Oklahoma, you heard Chris and I talk about that. I, too, think it's great for the league. And the deal is this. Texas and Oklahoma were leaving the Big 12. And Ed Sankey said, what do? Do you take them or do you let them go somewhere else? I think with Dallas-Fort Worth being the number 4 television market in the country, it becomes automatically the biggest television market in the SEC. You maintained geographical integrity when you added these schools. The Big Ten, did the grab for Los Angeles and USC and UCLA. And then they took on Team Nike up there with Oregon, and Washington, of course, has to come. It's almost like a travel partner for the circuit. Not geographically, to me, sound. The thing I like about the SEC, it's still the SEC. Texas and Oklahoma still attached to these other schools. Chris talked about some of the new rivalries. Well, you've already got Arkansas waiting to play these teams. You've already got Texas A&M waiting to play these teams. And I think LSU will have some fun with it. Certainly Missouri will have some fun with Oklahoma. Word on the street is, Missouri got good by beating Oklahoma for some of these recruits. Guys Oklahoma used to get, Eli Drinkwitz and the Missouri Tigers getting those guys now. So these are going to be very interesting things that play out. I think that's hot. Cold to me, the EA Sports rankings. Now, look, I'm as excited as anybody about college football. I might even go buy another video game console because that game is cool, and it's been a minute since I played it, but it is a lot of fun. But how can you tell me that Missouri is not ranked in the top 25 in the EA Sports rank? I mean, this is crazy. Missouri is a legit borderline top 10, top 15 program, regardless of what you think about them. They deserve that credit. And then Colorado. Look, I was as excited and mesmerized by Deion Sanders in Colorado at the start of last season as anybody, but we all saw how that turned out. And that's why I think ESPN has Colorado number 36 as Prime Time has done another reload of the Buffaloes, and yet EA Sports has them 16. Come on, man. Let's get real with that. Hey, the rest of this week, keep it real with DawgNation Daily with Brandon Adams, 10 a.m. You're going to see some shows and some programming there. Then you got Jeff Santel on Wednesday nights with his recruiting show, and it has been sizzling hot. I'm not going to go down all the recruits. There's too much to mention, but Jeff has had all that covered on DawgNation.com. He's taking trips around the country, got some insight into some recruits. You're going to want to check him out Wednesday night, and then Thursday night it's DawgNation at Large with Kaylee Manziel and Connor Riley. Never know what's going to pop up in that variety show. A lot of fun lists and a lot of entertaining debate. So you're going to want to check out the DawgNation programming on our DawgNation YouTube channel, as well as our DawgNation Facebook page and our DawgNation homepage right here. You can get me, more of me, Mike Griffith, on Twitter at Mike Griffith32. Need all the fire support I can get these days with these hot takes I'm putting out. Texas doesn't like it that I don't think they're going to hit their over-under. Tennessee's not so sure about me anymore. I think the only people that are behind me right now are the Georgia fans, provided that I continue to predict Georgia goes undefeated this season, which right now, that's exactly how I feel. So everybody, have a great week. Have a great 4th of July.